All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, late September 1986, the city of Cleveland has a great idea. On a chilly, windy day, 1.5 million balloons were released into the air above the city in an attempt to break a Guinness World Record. But what started out as a fundraising stunt designed to benefit the United Way of Cleveland, good idea, it turned into a disaster. I don't know how much more of an intro folks need for this, other than to say that this event is generally referred to as the Great Cleveland Balloon Disaster of '86 or the Doomed Cleveland BalloonFest of '86. You know, any metaphor or synonym for disaster gets sort of plugged in here. I will add one tidbit, which is, as a result of this, the Guinness Book of World Records no longer recognizes events that are deemed to be, quote, environmentally unsound. So at least there's a legacy from that. So is this political? I'm not really sure. Is this esoteric? Kind of. Or are we going to have fun talking about this? Absolutely. Here to do that and to help do that is none other than Cleveland native Clare Malone, staff writer at The New Yorker and host of the Ringer podcast Just Like Us, which is all about 2000s tabloid culture. But Clare, thank you for doing this. Nice to have you on the show.
It's good to be here, Jody. Thanks for asking.
And Clare and I were on the 538 Politics podcast for many, many years and was hoping and been trying to get you on this show. And I will also say we did you a solid, Clare, because 2 episodes ago we talked about the basket of deplorables comment and really put ourselves back in the 2016 headspace. And I thought about asking you to be on, but then I was like, she doesn't need that.
Nope. It's very funny. Like, Jody, I remember starting in... I had been a staffer at The New Yorker, and I started at 538 in like December of 2015. And they were like, oh, like, we're going to do a podcast. And I didn't know we were going to do a podcast. So I just remember like my first week of work, you being like, hi, I'm Jody. We're in a podcast and we're like piloting it. And I was just like, okay.
Well, I will say that I think we first met at like a bar or a mixer or something the night before we were piloting, and within 30 seconds I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Claire's great. And I continue to say you were the secret weapon of that show and the best part of that show. So yeah,
that's funny. I remember that party, and this is terrible, but I had like, I don't know if I should say this, you can cut it out, but like there were so many men on staff at 538 that it was still my first week of work, and I literally was like, I felt like I had facial blindness for like men in button-down shirts. I was like, which one is which?
They're all wearing khakis and blue button-downs. What is happening?
Oh my God. I mean, yes. And that was a lingering thing.
Man.
But Clare, look, the whole point of this is to not talk about 2015, 2016, but to actually talk about 1986 in Cleveland. And here also, of course, to do that are Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt, author of Partisans, and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
All right, Clare, 1986. I'm doing the math here. Did anyone in your family attend BalloonFest?
Highly doubtful.
Okay.
I don't think that's how the Brennan Malone household rolled. And also, this is like 4 months before my birth, so I was gestating.
Oh wow.
But like my dad has worked in the same, well, did until he moved recently, like worked in the same downtown Cleveland office, so he would have seen it. like 100%. I've never asked him about it. He was, as he said, missed the 80s because of children, but he had to have seen this.
Especially because this is a story with a long tail. So if he didn't see the event itself, he probably saw bits and pieces of the aftermath.
He saw the remnants.
Can someone else describe the video? Because I actually didn't watch
will
this one, so
totally
it's not
describe
fresh.
the video.
Kellie was like, I was made for this moment.
I was blown away by this. So if you want to see it, you can go on YouTube. You can watch this video where they have gathered 1.5 million balloons. I think the initial idea was 2 million. They cut it back to 1.4 million. They got about 1.5 million. Again, people are making donations, so it's for charity. It's for a good cause. They're trying to break a world record. You see all kinds of children, teenagers, adults, the senior citizens. They all have Band-Aids around their fingers because they've gotten blisters by tying all of these rubber Band-Aids. I'm like, oh my God. It looks painful. And I know this because I've had, birthday parties with my own children, and those freaking balloons are so hard to tie over and over again. Anyway,
You only do 500,000 for your birthday.
yeah, I know,
That's
right? Anyways,
Really
the
phoning it in.
balloons are like encased in sort of like a netting, a clear netting, and it almost isn't clear what it just looks like a giant blob. And then they do this countdown and they release the balloons, and then it looks like something out of a Marvel movie where it's like this amorphous balloon wave blob just like starts to grow and expand and get larger and larger, and it's full of like orange and yellows and all the rainbow colored, and you're like, what? And as the wind like carries these balloons higher and higher, and people are cheering, we did it, yeah, we did it. And then it's all downhill.
I'm watching it actually as you're describing it again. I've seen it before, but I'm rewatching it as you're doing it, and it's like it almost looks like a cross between like a mushroom, like a nuclear disaster mushroom cloud, or like an underwater like anemone kind of undulating.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Also, for the people who do the countdown launch are Big Chuck and Little John, who were these like Cleveland kind of like Saturday afternoon staples. The kind of thing was, I think Little John was a little person or just an extremely short man, and Big Chuck was big, and that was their whole shtick, is that they were like this comedy duo. So they're like doing the countdown. It's very like images of my child, like these are the people who are on TV.
It looked like some sort of like alien climbing up a building. Like when you look at it from different angles, you see the balloons just sort of like enveloping this tall
It's the terminal tower. Yeah. It's like the big. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned your dad working downtown. I mean, I don't know. We'll have to triangulate the location. But like this idea that you would be in your office and all of a sudden just like it would be dark outside, and you'd be like, "What's going on?" And you look out, and there's just this blob.
I'm looking at the direction that the balloons are blowing, and I think he used to work at the Rockefeller Building. I think they're maybe going the opposite direction. They're going because I think they go out into the lake.
Yeah, they do.
Yes,
They
but
do.
anyway, part of this story too. But,
Yeah.
But anyway, so what other memories or what other thoughts do you have as you watch this and you think about it? Or
So I always knew about it, and the thing I had always known about it was okay. So it's of a piece of like, I would say 3 Cleveland like disasters almost of public relations. And the first is so like this happened in 1986, and the city was always trying to, I don't think I'm breaking news to anyone, where like Cleveland had a bad national reputation because during most of the 20th century it was a steel town, and they dumped all of the industrial waste into the Cuyahoga River, and the river caught fire. Now I think it caught fire famously, I think most famously in 1969. But again, as my father said, when I said one time, we were talking one time about the river catching on fire, and my dad was like, yeah, but which time? Because it caught on fire constantly, actually. Wow. It was like, it was a thing that always happened. But I think there was like this Rachel Carson, the environmental movement, things were becoming more, people were thinking more about the environment. And so Cleveland became that national joke, and the river caught on fire. And then it kind of spent the next, to this day, sort of, trying to recover from being the butt of jokes. And so like in the early 80s, I think it was in 1980 or 1981, Cleveland had this sort of like marketing campaign. and the slogan was, New York's the Big Apple, but Cleveland's a plum. And it had a big picture of like a purple plum. And I remember as a kid, they used to sell these shirts at this shop called Big Fun. But it was supposed to be, I mean, again, it fell flat. It was supposed to be like yeah, it was supposed to be like, I mean, there's other cities, but like Cleveland's a real gem. Now, like, I think you can go into, should you be comparing yourself adversely to another large city? Probably not. But it was sort of like this earnest effort. The other funnier, I think, version of the balloon disaster, because I think they ascribe potentially the deaths of two men in a boating who were lost on Lake Erie prior to the balloon launch. They ascribed, the Coast Guard said, we had a real trouble with search and rescue because there were so many balloons. So I always knew that there was that like darker aspect of the story. A lighter Cleveland disaster is 10-cent beer night, which I believe was in like 1973, something like that. It was in the 70s. And again, like at the old Cleveland Stadium, which was on the lake, and so the wind used to blow in really hard. They were trying to get more people to come, so they made beer 10 cents. And the crowd got real rowdy. And by the later innings, they literally had to stop the game because people had thrown beer bottles as like rockets onto the field. And it is actually, fun fact, the reason why when you go to watch a sporting event in America and you order like a beer, they don't give you a cap on it because they don't want it to turn into like a literal like full rocket. So those are the kind, the lake burning, Cleveland's a plum, and 10-cent beer night, I feel like are all kind of a piece of these like famous not good looks for Cleveland things. And it's, I mean, we can talk, like, I've been monologuing for a second, but like as a Clevelander, it's both funny to me and also like there's this earnest side of like the city was in really dire straits and was constantly trying to rebrand itself. And I think has done so more successfully now. In different ways. But like
they say that in the video though. The guy's like, we're no longer the mistake on the lake. I was like, oh, that's what you were
the mistake on the lake. I mean, it's like it was such a thing. And I mean they also called that stadium the mistake on the lake, and then like people started, the city started catching shit for things that happened in the 70s, as it was like basically it was like punching the city while it was down. But also releasing balloons and 10-cent beer night are funny.
So we should talk about why this was such a disaster, why it was the doomed balloon launch, because Kellie left us at this moment where the sky is filling with multicolored balloons, and it does look kind of like a Marvel movie, but it's also kind of cool. But Claire's been talking about these winds coming off of Lake Erie and what's happening in the atmosphere. And one of the things that is happening in the atmosphere is that a low pressure front is moving through. And so these balloons are ascending into the heavens, and then they just kind of stop ascending, and the air starts to push them back down. And so now all of a sudden, instead of having this like glorious uplifting balloon launch, you have 1.5 million balloons starting to press down on the city. And it's coming in the middle of traffic, and it's blanketing the lake, and it's blanketing the beach, and everywhere across Cleveland suddenly you have all of these balloons that have just turned into both a big distraction for drivers, as Claire was saying, like they're stopping the Coast Guard from being able to go out and do search and rescue missions. The lake is suddenly clogged with all of these balloons, and what had been this like moment of uplift, erasing the mistake on the lake, is suddenly just one more disaster.
I appreciate the solidarity around it though. Like, like in some ways, like the energy that you get when you watch the clip of everyone's just like putting in their effort, getting their blisters, we're doing this for the team, and yet. And
it did raise, a not insignificant amount of money. It was $2. It was $1 for 2 balloons, and raised over almost $1.5 million for United Way. But I'm going to ask the obvious question, which is like, how did no one see that this was going to happen? Forget just like the weird wind, and they actually moved it earlier in the day because of weather. So like they were even just aware of like, oh, weather might be something we have to consider. But like, did they think? And maybe this is the Cleveland mindset I need to just embody. But, Claire, did they think like, oh, it's going to go up and it's going to like go across the lake and it'll be it'll be Detroit's problem. We don't have to deal with it. But like, what?
Canada can worry
What's
about
going
these
on?
balloons.
Canada, yeah.
Balloons, when they go up, balloons have always come down. For the history of time, balloons come down.
I mean, maybe this just speaks to not even like a Cleveland mindset, but like an 80s mindset of like, just like, I don't know. Like, I don't think anyone was thinking about the environmental impact, right? Like, that doesn't seem like a thing that factored in. Also, I'm thinking now, like, we have such, like, I have like the dark sky weather app, which is like a ridiculously accurate thing of like, what's the temperature going to be at this time? And like, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it is like living on a lake makes for often perilous weather conditions. Like, Cleveland's in the snow belt because like cold fronts come in and pick up a bunch of humidity off the lake and, dumps a bunch of snow on the city. I have no idea what they were thinking. I mean, it's
this
just,
would have been
I do
better
think
in Kansas, is what you're saying. In some landlocked area where the balloons could just roam free.
Until a tornado comes and it whips up all the balloons and starts flinging them at people.
There's no place in which this is a good idea.
That might be the case. I will say that the balloons, I think I've read that some of the balloons are they may have been biodegradable. I mean, it still would have been months and months, but that the latex balloons maybe were biodegradable. But it really
6
is then I
months
think
to
the fact that
dissolve.
they land in the water is the real issue. And there's these images of just like boats on the water and then just littered with balloons, all these balloons floating along the water. And so maybe the thinking was, it's not going to go out over the water. It's going to fall across the city and biodegrade or whatever.
But these animals, animals can choke on these balloons.
Exactly.
I mean, it's...
Well, and so a couple tidbits of the fallout here. We talked about the fishermen. And people were complaining in Canada. People were finding these balloons and complaining about them landing. A woman claimed that the balloons came over her Arabian horse farm and spooked her horses, and she ended up settling a lawsuit with the city and getting a little money for psychological damage done to her horses or whatever.
Wow.
But just amazing. And, I will say, all in all, I think this event actually lost money, not even because of the Arabian horse farm settlements, but just like I think it lost money just because of the like money it took to put it on and then the cleanup and all this stuff. So
I will say I'm very drawn to Claire's analysis of this as a moment in the 80s. Like the 80s were an era of excess without consequences, of everything will go up and nothing will ever come down. So the kind of hubris of the 1980s feels like it's at play.
Yeah, and also just to go back to like the mindset of like who would not think through the environmental impacts. And I say this not like trying to be shady at all to the city of Cleveland, but like to earnestly go back to like look, we're obviously all in this like very green mindset because we now have like the climate change existential crisis. Like, why did you have children? Because now they're going to like live in a burning hellhole. But, in the 80s, we were all kind of like, go to Mickey D's and get like your styrofoam coffee and like your pancakes in a styrofoam. Like I have very vivid childhood memories of like opening pancakes from McDonald's and in the styrofoam stuff. And like, I don't know where, like,
and then you throw it out the window when you're in the car.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like to go back to like Cleveland was a town of industry, right? It was like the sort of, now the mistake on the lake, the river, the Cuyahoga River that burned, that obviously all got Cleveland a bad national reputation. And it wasn't until, I think probably the late 90s, early 2000s that it started to try to get like very to try to change that environmental message. Like there's actually now every year a thing called the Burning River Festival, which is put on by Great Lakes Brewery, which is the local brewery. And it raises money for environmental causes. And they kind of, obviously trying to reclaim the name. But I just think like the mentality of people putting that event on who are Clevelanders in the 1980s, I legitimately would guess that there just wasn't any thought about like, balloons will be bad for the biosphere of Lake Erie. I'm pretty sure that was not like a factor in planning.
No.
I like the reclaiming of the burning river, and I wonder if maybe there will be a reclaiming of BalloonFest in some way. I will say, as we wrap up, in terms of kind of lessons learned, in 2011, the United Way spokesperson said, Jenna Snyder of the United Way said, we would not do a balloon launch ever again, which I think, good quote. But then she says, thank you for that quote, Jenna. But she says, we've learned a lot in the last 25 years. And I'm like, 25 years? It's like, it was 25 minutes. Is where you
that's a real mistakes were made kind of
Right.
No, very passive voice.
I like the idea of like, well, we've completed our 2-decade review of this and concluded that probably
Didn't
wasn't
go
the best idea. But the other little tidbit worth pointing out is this happens in 1986. It's an attempt to set a Guinness Book of World Records. The Guinness is like, we don't really want any part of this. But then in 1994, 8 years later, a town in England is like, we're going to go for this record.
No.
And they release 1.7 million balloons in Wiltshire, England. And same shit happens. They get sued. People are like, what's going on? There's a disaster. Everyone's like, who thought this was a good idea? But it's like, oh my God. 8 years later. So how quickly we forget.
We don't learn anything, do we? All for a good time. I mean, the amount of efforts that could have been contributed to trash pickup, or something else, like something that would have been useful. Like, there's nothing useful about doing balloon releases. And I get that they're pretty, but so are flowers, like planting trees, or like we're gonna water 100 flowers. I don't know, like something that's like just much more feasible and much more helpful than that.
This is funny, but I was just thinking about this. I feel like the United Way was such a like big charity when I was younger, and now I never hear about it. And I wonder if that's like, I don't know if that was a Cleveland thing or if it was like, it's just like plummeted in prominence. I don't know.
I still hear about them during like football games and stuff. But yeah,
Really?
but it feels very like
football.
no. I mean, every single thing about this feels late
Very
80s,
80s.
early 90s.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Feels like that.
including this video, which I think Kelly did a great job describing it, but folks really do have to go watch this video and see what happens.
Wild. Do you know what it made me think of, which is so weird as a kid that grew up in Sunday school? It felt like very Tower of Babel kind of to me, where it's like they're all like of like mind to create this one big thing and then God's like, nope. It's like the forces are like totally against this, and it completely fails, and that's
You've reached too high, Cleveland.
Yes.
Poor Cleveland. I feel like I should end this by
Yes,
saying,
please.
like, visit Cleveland, you guys, along with Pittsburgh and, well, parts of Detroit. Detroit's like a whole different story. But
I love Detroit.
has had like,
okay, I was born there.
Detroit's great, but I do think like in the past 20 years, the city has made these efforts to be like, we have the Cleveland Clinic, which, there's a whole other thing of like monopolies in general.
I mean, LeBron James is
like they have made this effort to become more of sort of like a small scale tourist town. And like there are lots of, I feel like people are like, oh, the Rock Hall. First of all, if you go to Cleveland, don't go to the Rock Hall. Sorry, Cleveland Tourism Board. But it's like really boring and has nothing to do with Cleveland. Cleveland is kind of like, it's like mini Chicago in the sense that there are like these little, there's lots of like, Eastern European ethnic food places and like the West Side Market. And it's just like a kind of, it's a city of neighborhoods. And it's like a pleasant place to be while still having a lot of the problems that still date back from like, the 70s and 80s and all that stuff. But it's still a good place to visit. And Lake Erie is the shallowest Great Lake and therefore the warmest to swim in during the summer because it heats up.
You should be a spokesperson for
I'm sold.
for Plum City
go.
or whatever you want.
It's a plum.
live
Cleveland's a
from
plum.
Cleveland. It's this day.
And as we wrap up, I'm also realizing that, we have Michigan representation and we have Illinois representation and Ohio representation. This is our most
Indiana
Midwest
here.
episode. Oh, sorry, Indiana. We have the
It
most
is.
Midwest episode we've done. So thank you.
That's really funny.
That's crazy.
Clare Malone, thank you so much for doing this. She's a staff writer at The New Yorker, and go check out that podcast series from The Ringer, Just Like Us. But this has been really fun, and next time we have you on, we'll do something actually political. But,
Yeah. This is a very nice diversion, and thank you for having me. Really fun.
And Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Cleveland, it's your time. It's time to say yes. It's time to say it is a happening city. We are on the move. It's no longer the butt of jokes or anything.
3, 2, 1. Here they go. Liftoff. Amazing. And the far end is up, and there they go, John. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no mistake on the lake anymore.
It's been an exhausting search for these Coast Guardsmen. They've been out on the water most of the day looking for two 40-year-old Cleveland men.
That big balloon launch in Cleveland today is one of the things that's making this search so tough for the Coast Guard. Can you imagine trying to find somebody floating out here or even spotting a life jacket with all these balloons on the water?
Radiotopia.